evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater, the largest single-screen drive-in in the United States. We're certainly glad you could be with us this evening, and don't forget the concession stand is open with all kinds of great things to eat and drink.
Mahoning Drive-In Radio. Welcome to another episode of, as I just said, Mahoning Drive-In Radio, the, to our knowledge, world's only podcast dedicated to the love and admiration and delving into of drive-in culture. Mark here from the Mahoning Drive-In Theater in Lehighton, Pennsylvania. It's our podcast, but I'll mention it anyway. We're from the Mahoning. Joining me once again tonight is an old friend of the podcast. This is longtime Las Vegas entertainment reporter Mike Weatherford, author of Cult Vegas, The Weirdest, The Wildest, The Swingin'est Town on Earth, available wherever books are sold, and writer, more to our interest here, of the ongoing comic book Drive-In Kings of 1977, which is now funding issue 6. We love Drive-In Kings. We've had Mike on several times to talk about Drive-In Kings. If you love the drive-in and 70s drive-in culture and trashy drive-in movies like we do, you really want to be reading this, and we will get into that later. But we are bringing Mike here not only to talk about Drive-In Kings, but also to talk about this weekend's October 24th and 25th Universal Monster Mash 9. 2 nights of triple features of Universal Monster classics. Mike is a monster kid from way back, so we're going to go down the roster. We're going to talk about Universal Monsters, Monster Kid memories, and all that. And eventually I am going to let Mike talk, which is right now. Hey, Mike, how are you?
Hey, so excited to be talking about this stuff.
So how did you first see Universal Monster movies? I'm going to guess not first run.
No, I'm not of Forrest J. Ackerman age, but his magazine did kind of warp my young brain. I'm a tail end boomer, I guess you would say. So really, the guys the age of John Landis and Joe Dante are like the prime monster kids. That when Universal first started packaging these movies for syndication, late 50s, early 60s, but that was still going on by the late 60s when I was a kid. And I don't know, some combination of seeing that issue of Famous Monsters in the drugstore and the local late show starting to do the syndication on Saturday night with our own local horror host. Somehow those forces combined.
So I was going to ask, it was so late night horror host. Do you remember the station and the host?
Oh, far too well. And there's actually a story about that, but it was Tulsa, Oklahoma, KOTV channel 6. And the horror host, he called himself Mazeppa. And he was actually in real life, he was Gaylord Sartain.
Oh, I heard about that. I love him.
Yeah. So, and his sidekick was Gary Busey. So
that's insane. And I'm sure probably little to no footage of this exists, unfortunately.
Actually, I think you can go on YouTube. In the VHS area, I actually bought a videotape compilation, and I think all those clips have been uploaded to YouTube now. These were just University of Tulsa students that kind of had the run of the studio. And like so many things back then, I'm sure they just backed up the tape and covered a lot of it up, but a lot of it did get saved. And it's crazy, especially seeing Busey.
Wow. Very young, very slim Busey.
Yeah. Teddy Jack Eddie. Is that so hard to say? That was his character.
Gaylord Sartain, I first knew from Hee Haw. He was one of the rep players on that show, and my grandparents would watch it on Sunday night. So for years I saw him, and I always thought he was really funny. And slightly younger people, I think, know him from the Ernest movies or the Hey Vern, It's Ernest TV show where he and his younger TV brother Bobby were always up to hijinks. But that man entertained generations, and sadly, it's a name I think most people don't know.
I wasn't going to delve too deep into that in case people didn't know or didn't care, so I'm glad you brought that up. But yeah, I think when Busey got his big break in the Buddy Holly story, he got Gaylord in a kind of a bit part as the big bopper, and then Gaylord had was in a couple dramatic movies too. I think he's in Fried Green Tomatoes and Driving Mississippi Burning.
Right.
So yeah, once you know who he is, you look for him, you know about it. Tulsa wasn't a big it didn't have tons of breakout people. So there was a lot of Tulsa pride and a lot of that real specific Okie humor in the show.
That's just, I literally, as you were talking, not that I wasn't listening, I wrote down Mazeppa because I remember reading about it in some magazine. It might have been like Scary Monsters or something 20 years ago or more, where they just would always highlight some kind of regional horror host. I mean, I was involved with a horror host show. I couldn't tell you when it was. It was probably at least a decade ago now, that still airs here and there. And so I've sort of been in that world a little bit. And it's wild to see that it still goes on. It still thrives. It's become a public access TV, internet kind of thing. But it's nice to know the tradition still lives, and it's mostly the same like dozen or 20 public domain movies that everybody runs to not have to pay for anything. But when I first saw the Universal Monster movies, it was on Boston's WLVI TV 56, which was a big independent station. I was in New Hampshire, but it was one of the stations we got. They ran a ton of movies. And on Saturday, they did a thing called Creature Double Feature, which, Dana Gould talks about a lot of. It was a big thing for people in New England in the 70s into the very early 80s. Eventually, it got replaced by Svengoolie, but because it was owned by the same parent company. But that's how I saw my first Hammer movies, my first Amicus movies, my first Toho films, and the Universal Monster movies. Let's go through the list and see if you have any thoughts or memories of any of these.
I was going to say, as your lineup this weekend will prove, these movies most of them were short, and that really let these local stations cut in with the antics of the horror hosts. Because if a movie only running 75 minutes, that gives you up to like 40 extra minutes to go crazy. And I'm not sure which captivated me more, trying to con the parents into letting me stay up late on Saturday night. I don't know if it was the movies or Mazeppa, but it's some kind of magic combination there.
It's funny, which we each had a different two sides of the con. We each had a different con. You had to con your parents into letting you stay up late, and I had to con my grandparents into letting me control their TV for like 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon. But luckily, it was on at a time. It was like post-cartoons, pre-sports. Once sports came on, they just were like, "Get away from me, kid, you bother me." But before that, I could actually like watch stuff. So,
well, the sleepover was the card to play. If you could get a little buddy to come over to your house or go over to that little buddy's house, and preferably one whose parents were more lenient, then you could play the card of like, it was like, Jeffrey's here, so can we stay up late, watch Mazeppa, that kind of thing.
He doesn't have a TV at home, so he's always heard about Mazeppa. Can't we be the ones to give him the gift of Mazeppa? Was there a prominent local sponsor for that show, if you recall? I know a lot of times there would be a certain like local business or company would sponsor the show.
Oh, you keep asking this stuff, and I'm like, I'll keep talking about it. But no, he very strongly had a co-promotion with 7-Up, the Uncola, and then there was a little mini chain of record stores, if you remember those. And he would do personal appearances and show up at the record stores. Greer's Records and Tapes.
Wow. I love that stuff. And that's what I love, talking about looking up this thing on YouTube. There is a ton of old horror host stuff on YouTube, and sometimes it comes from like the master tapes, which is insane. So we who were never in that region or not alive at the time can get a little taste of what it might have been like staying up late and watching these things. So Friday, October 24th, which is coming very, very close, and by the time you listener hear this might have already passed, we start off with House of Frankenstein. Now, I believe we're doing these in chronological order. House of Frankenstein was, I believe, the first of what is now called the Monster Rally films, where they really just put a ton of monsters in these films, as many as they could squeeze in. And it's like the Mad Scientist, the Hunchback, which is really kind of a physical ailment, not a monster. It's a different time. Frankenstein, the Wolfman, Dracula. And when we program these shows, we try to hit all of the main monsters one way or another, either by featuring a Dracula film, a Frankenstein film, a Mummy, or we kind of cheat and play one of these House of movies where in one film you can get like 5 creatures. So I don't have specific memories of House of Frankenstein. I do have the Castle Films 200-foot silent condensed version of it, which has got a really cool box. Do you have any specific memories of House of Frankenstein?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the Castle Films, too, because the structure of House of Frankenstein, they were actually able to get 2 separate little Castle Films out of that, because the Dracula segment's almost standalone, basically. So They cut that one into a Castle film called, I think, The Doom of Dracula. And then from the rest of the flick they pulled the regular House of Frankenstein title.
And for those who are unaware, too young, to not film centric, can you explain what Castle Films was and what they did?
Well, kids, yeah, there was this thing called Super 8, and some people managed to get hold of Super 8 projectors, and then you go to the camera section of Sears department store, and with these very compelling little square boxes, the Super 8 or 8mm reels of cut down 8 to 10 minute versions of the Universal horrors, usually silent, because none of us kids ever knew anybody with a sound projector. So silent and subtitled. Those are all over YouTube now too, I think, or as extras on the legit releases. Sometimes they'll add the 8mm edit of it.
I like how Castle Films, and there were other companies too, but Castle seemed to be the most prominent one. DRAM or DRAM, DERAM is another one. They may have been British. I think they did a lot more like martial arts and things like that. And this went on well into I think the late 70s. This was still an option for people because it was really pre-home video. They had something for every budget. So I've picked up some that were 50-foot reels, which were basically like a scene from the movie. But they all had these really cool painted box covers that were original art. It wasn't just like usually it wasn't just a photo from the film or the movie poster. It was something that was created for Castle Films, which makes these very collectible now among monsters.
Yeah, I think some of them, some listeners will probably correct us if we're wrong, but I think some were like by James Bama, who did the Doc Savage book covers, and
wow,
maybe by Basil Gogos, who did the Famous Monsters covers. But yeah, I mean, I think Curse of Frankenstein 8mm, I was probably picked for the box because, or no, I'm sorry, the Mummy's Tomb. That's what it was. It was probably picked for the box cover because the Mummy movies themselves were kind of the least of the Universal series. But maybe the best to edit down to 10 minutes. I don't know.
You just edit down the shambling. Instead of 10 minutes for him to walk across a room, it's 80 frames. House of Frankenstein followed by House of Dracula, which is a bit more focused on the Dracula character. Now, in these films, Dracula was not Bela Lugosi. It was not the Dracula that most people think of in their head when they think of Universal Dracula. It was John Carradine as a very erudite, very regal, sophisticate, like a suit and a cape and a top hat and a thin mustache. Do you have any memories of House of Dracula? I literally have no memories of any of the first three movies we're playing, which makes me excited because I'll be able to see them relatively fresh on the big screen this time.
Well, I'm really glad you're running them back to back, for what could essentially be the same movie. They're actually fairly different. I mean, when you have overlapping casts, same director, same screenwriter, it's all, you would think like they're basically the same, but they kind of take on different tones. House of Frankenstein, I would call it a greatest hits compilation of the other Universal movies. That's the way to kind of give it some coherence. It's kind of like now we've got to weave the Wolfman in, and then the Frankenstein monster makes this cameo at the end, breaks out. House of Dracula is kind of that, but it's a little weirder, a little stranger, has kind of a more mysterious tone, and the story keeps you guessing a little bit more. So they play really well together.
And we do have of the iconic Universal classic Universal monster actors. Boris Karloff is in, I believe, House of Frankenstein.
That's what makes that one what it is from those very first scenes when you see him kind of a, how do they say it, Deus Ex Machina, breaks him out of, lightning bolt strikes the prison and frees him and the guy that is to become his hunchbacked assistant. Lightning bolt breaks him out. But those very first scenes, you just are reminded how great the photography is and how great the production values are. And then Boris Karloff actually getting to go full circle and getting to play kind of the Dr. Frankenstein part, although not by name.
They list him as the Mad Doctor on all the posters, just trying to put everybody into the category of some kind of fiend. Boris Karloff, a very good actor. People don't often think about that. They think about, he was in monster movies. He was Frankenstein's monster, and he's really good, and he's very compelling. And that voice I could just listen. It's like with Vincent Price. I could listen to Boris Karloff read The Phone Book, you know? And it's always
Oh,
exciting to get him back on our screen. And these movies look fabulous on our screen. They look like, we do 35 millimeter, almost 35 millimeter exclusively, and we do our best to make it look as good as it can look. But there are times with these prints that Universal gives us where you'd swear you were watching digital because there isn't a speck on them. They look like they must have looked the day they came out.
And these two movies, the fact that you're playing them together and they came out fairly close to one another toward the end of World War II, I would, even though they probably didn't really play a lot of drive-ins, I don't know when the drive-ins would probably be more for the 50s movies we're
Yeah,
going to talk about. But I would say these two are the most drive-in with quotes around it of the Universal movies. And I say that because, last year, Joe Bob did his Jamboree at our Las Vegas drive-in, and he and Sven Gulli, they stuck to the Stone Cold classics, the first Frankenstein, the first Dracula, Bride of Frankenstein. And I don't know if it's just me or anybody else, but like when I watch those you watch those kind of reverently, and you don't want people in the next car, the next lawn chair snickering or doing the MST and making their jokes. But these two movies, I'd say it's open season. I mean, one car can sit there and watch them like they're in church, and the next car can sit there and make their jokes. And you're both right. I mean, they're kind of campy enough that they deserve whatever they get coming, but they're also incredibly fast moving, really short, really watchable, and just never a dull moment in either one of them.
One of them, I can't remember which one now. I just basically have the list of films in front of me. One of the films we are showing, it might be House of Dracula, is 67 minutes long. And so, yeah, you want to talk about a movie that has no fat on it. That breezes right along. And we always get a really cool crowd for this show. Since the first time we did it, 9 years ago, it impresses me that I always say, you say like 8 to 80, but it's really more like toddlers to the elderly come out for these movies. and they all love them. And it works great. It's always a big crowd. It's an enthusiastic crowd. Pretty much a reverent crowd. I'm sure some people come out just for kicks, but for the most part, people are just really into these movies. And part of you could look at this lineup and say, wow, these are a lot of deep cuts. We try to mix deep cuts we try to do things that, people will come in for. So the big marquee names as far as the creatures, but also to give the hardcore Universal fans something that they've never seen on a big screen before. Thus the third feature each night. And this time the third feature each night is digital because Universal sadly did not have prints of these, but we really wanted to show these. The last film we have is Monster on the Campus, and that is a 50s drive-in monster movie. Do you have any precious memories of Monster on the Campus?
I do not. That was the one that I've, only in the era when these things are really available, like, now Universal Monsters has its own streaming channel, so you'll flip over and catch 10 minutes of it. But so, no, I don't remember that one from back in my Monster Kid era. It's clearly a jump forth from the previous two. Those are kind of the end of Universal's gothic horror monster cycle. The war was over, families were reunited. Jump forward like 10, 12 years. We are actually, I think, on the Leave It to Beaver Street when the film opens. I think you see the Munsters house there, and the mindset of the thing is squarely that kind of fantasized 50s suburbia where the husband comes in and wearing his suit, and the wife has the string of pearls, and he pours himself a drink, and she's smoking a cigarette, and they're talking about the values of academia and college. Right. So you are on that back lot, and you're totally in that late 50s mindset, and the drive-ins were raging by then. So I would go out on a limb and wonder if this one was actually made as much for the drive-ins as for the indoor crowd.
I would think it would have had to have been at that point, being that this was well into the 50s as opposed to well into the 40s for the previous two. I don't want to sound like I don't know anything about anything, but I'm actually excited that I don't know and don't have a lot of recall about, I would say, 3/4 of these films, simply because I want to watch them myself. So I'm like very excited about that. It's not like we pick these blind. We just, sometimes we pick movies we haven't seen.
It's a great third feature. I mean, after the other two, it's a complete shift in tone, and you want the unintentionally funniest one to be the third one I would think. This one's a real hoot. You've got these prestigious academics that import this prehistoric fish from Madagascar, and it's a big deal. It generates national press. But what do you do then? You actually attempt to pick up the fish by its teeth, and then you are surprised when your hand gets cut, and whatever's in this Neanderthal fish infects you.
So it basically creates, to quote another 50s film, a teenage caveman, essentially, or a caveman on the campus. And it's a really cool creepy creature design. It's one I remember seeing. There was an earlier series of monster trading cards in the 60s. I got the sort of, they resurrected them in the early 80s, and they were called You'll Die Laughing. And it was all stills from Universal monster movies with funny captions on the front. And I had one that was the most iconic still for Monster on the Campus. So it was a movie I always knew about, and I eventually saw it on Creature Double Feature. And I think maybe I've seen it once since then in the last 20 or so years, but it's one I'm looking forward to because I like 50s monster movies, and we don't show a ton of them at our theater. So it's a nice, and as you say, it's peppy, it's silly, it's fun. It's a good way to end the night on an up note. And hopefully people will enjoy it. And the thing about this too is, this time of year we are starting the films at 7:30 because it gets darker earlier. And a triple feature, especially a triple feature of movies that mostly are barely over an hour, wraps up before a normal one of our double features would have wrapped up, a month or two earlier.
Yeah, that's great if it's getting cold out there. Yeah, this was definitely the kind of 50s sci-fi monster thing that you see made fun of, and deservedly so. It's a hoot.
So we move on to Saturday, Shocktober 25th, night 2 of Universal Monster Mash. I just like to call it that. Universal Monster Mash 9. I don't know what we're going to do for 10. 10 is probably going to be a greatest hits. Anyway, the first film is one we have shown before, but it is a big anniversary. This is Werewolf of London from 1935, which makes that a math. Is that a 90th anniversary? Dear God.
I'll take it. Yeah.
It's a 90th anniversary screening of Werewolf of London, the song that may or may not have inspired a great Warren Zevon song. And this is one I remember. There's a series of books. I don't remember if we've talked about this before in the show. I know I have with Tom Shabilla. The Crestwood House hardcover books that were released in I think probably the late 70s, early 80s. It was a series of storybooks aimed at kids that each one told the story of a Universal monster film. And they had black and white covers and orange spines and a lot of photos from the movie. And I checked this out of my local library when I was a little kid. And it was Henry Hull portrays the titular Werewolf of London. And I always really liked the monster design for him. And the the co-star in this movie is Warner Oland, who most people know as one of the many Caucasian Charlie Chan actors in classic Hollywood. And I believe the story is that these two men go on one of the two men go on an expedition to the Himalayas and bring back a strange flower that causes lycanthropy. Am I correct in that?
You are, yes. It's kind of Henry Hull visits Tibet, and he's after the flower, and he gets attacked by a werewolf. And then when the action moves back to London, Warner Oland's character shows up at a party and basically tells him, "Hey, I'm the werewolf that attacked you, and we're both after the same flower, and I couldn't grow it. You can, and it's the cure." The funny thing is that, in a way, I like this one at least as much, maybe better than the Wolfman, but I love them both. But it's amazing how they're both two really different stories. And it's often noted, that the Wolfman is kind of the character that Universal really invented the lore for it, while Frankenstein and Dracula were loosely based on the source material. The Wolfman, they came up with the whole thing themselves. And so both these movies really have nothing to do with each other as far as the lore about what creates a werewolf, how you kill it, and that kind of thing. So you can watch them both independently.
I really enjoyed this. I had seen it in my youth, but I saw it, I think, really for the first time paying full attention when we ran this at one of our Universal Monster Mashes years ago. And it's a little slower. It's a little more mannered in that it's earlier 30s. More dialogue heavy, but as you say, the story and the idea is really interesting. This sort of battle of wills between these two cultured gentlemen is really interesting. And how often do you meet somebody and they introduce themselves as, "Hi, I'm a werewolf"? And the makeup is really cool.
Yeah,
Interestingly,
that I was going to say that might be kind of why it isn't quite as famous. Like you said, it's a little stodgier and
right.
creakier because it is mid 30s, but also the Lon Chaney Wolfman makeup is so iconic that the Henry Hull makeup is by comparisons definitely just a guy with a little bit of extra hair glued on his face, and a nose. It's not, doesn't have that impact. That it's not the thing, you walk into any Halloween store and go, that's the Wolfman. It's not quite that obvious.
That's a Wolfman.
Yeah.
Interestingly,
Different Wolfman.
I believe, grandson of Henry Hull, Cortland Hull, is a fan of monstery things, and he operates a wax museum somewhere in Connecticut called the Witch's Dungeon, where he creates horror wax museum figures of classic Universal characters, one of which is the Werewolf of London. So when in Connecticut, please visit the Witch's Dungeon, which I've always wanted to do but never have. The second film on the roster is the one I do know pretty well, and I do have a connection with this movie. It is 1955's Revenge of the Creature. This is the second film in the Creature from the Black Lagoon trilogy, if you will, and features Clint Eastwood in a small role, as does Tarantula. And this follows right up with the original Creature from the Black Lagoon. He's been captured. He has been brought for study to, I don't remember the name of, it's like a Marineland kind of thing in Florida. And he's basically put on display as, come see the dancing monkey Gillman underwater. Gillman doesn't quite like that and seeks his titular revenge. Originally in 3D. We are not showing it that way because 3D really doesn't work at the drive-in. But it's a fun movie. It moves right along. It's got some great Florida location photography. And I originally saw this two ways. This was one of the movies in, I think it was 1983, I want to say 82, 83, when 3D came back to, 3D came back in theaters. 3D always historically reared its head when the movie theaters or studios were afraid that something was keeping people away from the movies. When it was in the 50s, it came out when TV was a threat. In the 80s, it came out when cable and home video was a threat. More recently, it came out to battle streaming and piracy and things like that. And it's actually held on longer now than it ever did before. But it was originally in 3D, and there was a big push for 3D TV around 82. And I saw it again on Boston's Channel 56, Channel 38, the other Boston independent station, ran a couple other movies. They did Gorilla at Large and a movie called Inferno that was like a survival tale in the desert. And they ran the Three Stooges shorts that were in 3D. And 56 did Revenge of the Creature. They may have also done Gorilla at Large. But I remember how exciting it was to go to my local cable company and get 3D glasses. At that point as a kid, 3D was something I'd only ever read about. And it worked okay on TV. And then another time, not long after that, my local library ran a 3D print of this for kids on 16 millimeter in the basement. And so I always equate 3D with Revenge of the Creature and Revenge of the Creature with 3D. What are your thoughts on this second, literally, creature feature?
That's funny that you say that about the 3D because I've never seen this one in 3D, and I wasn't sure. It seemed like from what I've read on it about it that they've released it both flat and 3D back in the day. But I was going to say it's so cool you guys are showing this because most of the chances to see one of these on the big screen is the original, the first one, and even like the Las Vegas Parks and Rec department ran the first one outdoors and passed out the two-color cardboard 3D glasses. But this one is really it's a real worthy sequel. It's you mentioned Marineland, and I think it might actually got called Marineland in the film. Might be like an example of product placement, but I think that was a really cool thing that you saw used later on. They the first one, the civilization goes to the creature's element, and then the second one, they go and they bring him back to our world, and you see that later in the Jurassic Park sequel, The Lost World, and you see it in I think Jaws 3D was the one where they actually takes place at a Marineland type amusement park.
Yeah, like a Marineland or a SeaWorld or something like that.
Yeah.
Now, if you could almost say the new Tron does that. It's sort of like a pattern for films. It's like normal person goes into a strange place, sees strange things, and then the sequel is the strange thing is brought into the normal world. Revenge of the Creature is super fun. It is, speaking of 3D, I always get on a kick about this. So in the 50s, 3D was achieved by having two physical film prints, one for the left eye, one for the right eye, running on two projectors simultaneously interlocked so that they would be in sync. And you wore these grayish polarized glasses, and the quality of that 3D was phenomenal. Later, they would do the red-blue 3D, which is what everybody thinks of as 3D now. And red-blue was never really like the normal way to watch 3D. It was the way that you would print a poster in Dynamite magazine or a comic book or something like that. Worked great for that. But for moving things, it was always tricky, especially for anything in color. It didn't really work well because those shades on your glasses are supposed to remove those shades from what you're looking at, but when those shades exist in a full color picture, it causes kind of mayhem. But originally, Revenge of the Creature, they wouldn't have played 3D in drive-ins or Creature from the Black Lagoon because the drive-ins really weren't capable of doing that kind of 3D, and I think it also required a silver screen and much more light output. We have run the print that goes around now of Creature from the Black Lagoon, which is the anaglyph, the red-blue 3D, which works sort of okay. It didn't work great.
Yeah.
Again, because it's got to be a very, very bright light in a very dark space. And beyond that, they printed on color film. And that print, I think, dates back to probably the 80s, and it's faded. So the red and the blue aren't really like red and blue anymore. So it works okay. But it's the easiest
you get a
way
guy
to
like me with the glasses where one eye is a lot weaker than the other one.
Yes.
And so you're putting the cardboard things on, and the two tones are supposed to make each eye equal, but it doesn't work that way.
I have the same thing. Like, I'm a sucker for 3D. I love the idea of 3D. I think even the modern era, it's very rarely utilized very well. But when it does work, I think it's really cool. But I was very, very lucky years ago. The Coolidge Corner Theater in Boston did a 3D festival, and they ran a lot of the classic 3D movies with original two projector polarized 3D. And I got to see Creature from the Black Lagoon and the Three Stooges shorts and Dial M for Murder and stuff like that. It was a total blast. So that's a whole lot of talking about movies we're not showing at Universal Monster Mash. So the final film of the night is the one we've gotten the most questions about, because a lot of people don't know about this. And I didn't know about this until probably the 90s or so. We were playing the Spanish version of Dracula. Now, this is not Bela Lugosi dubbed into Spanish. This is not Bela Lugosi speaking Spanish. The way the story is that the Todd Browning Bela Lugosi classic from 1931 that everybody knows as Universal's Dracula did its thing during the day. And when they called it a night at the end of the day, or they called it a day at the end of the night, they would leave, and then a whole different crew of technicians would come in and shoot a Spanish language version for Mexico and Spanish-speaking countries, Spain and things like that. Laurel and Hardy did something like this too. Some of their shorts you can find, they shot a Spanish language version, but in that case, it actually is Laurel and Hardy speaking phonetic Spanish, probably very laughably to a Spanish-speaking audience. This film actually brought in Spanish-speaking actors. So it is an alternate version. It's an alternate universe Dracula. It's the same sets, but they're shot and lit differently. Sometimes they're framed in ways that the Browning version doesn't. Sometimes you see more of a set than you would have in the Browning version. It's different performances. Some people think it's better. It's been so long since I've seen it, I don't remember. We are presenting it digitally because it's the only way we can show it. It is one people have asked for over the years, and we like to put something third at this show that rewards the serious Universal Monster fans for staying all the way to the end. So do you have any thoughts or anecdotes on the Spanish Dracula?
This is really rare opportunity, and anybody that's into Universal horror will definitely want to be there for this. There was an author who sadly was killed in a car wreck not too long ago, but he was kind of the leading expert on the Universal horror, David J. Skal, if I pronounce his name right, Skal.
I believe so.
And in the late 80s, he wrote a book about Dracula called Hollywood Gothic, and he was then one of the few people that had actually seen the complete version. He actually went to Cuba and to their archives or their library and found a reel that had been missing in any known American version of it, and his book kind of created the interest, so that Universal actually put it out as an extra when they started doing the DVDs of the Dracula films.
Right.
But Yeah, you can watch it, and it is a really weird experience because it was a real short period of time. You would ask, well, gosh, we're right off the silent movie era. Why didn't they just subtitle the Lugosi version? And his explanation of that is that talkies were new and they were a phenomenon and they were getting people into the theater, but people wanted to hear the talking in their own language. They didn't want it dubbed, so
Right.
so for a couple of years, a lot of movies did that where they different cast went in at night and filmed on the same sets. But Dracula is like the only classic. And so you watch them and it's this real weird kind of surreal thing because as even Joe Bob admitted when he ran Dracula last year, he was like, folks, I got to warn you, this movie's slow and it's really static. And while it was directed by Todd Browning, who was kind of a warped genius of a director, I guess his personal demons were kind of in full sway while he was filming Dracula. And he basically phoned it in. And everybody remembers that first, 10, 15 minutes, the visit to Dracula's castle. And then the movie really kind of falls off the cliff after that. It's just a film version of the stage play with real static shots and a lot of medium shots and not a lot of close-ups. Well, the Spanish version just goes for it. It's really fluid camera work, really improves the lighting. The performances are more animated. The women are sexier. The trio of female vampires, they aren't the 1930s church ladies with their hair in the buns. They're these wild creatures with the hair flowing. The the only thing that's not real good about it is the guy who plays Dracula, and you can make up your mind for yourself. But Carlos Villarreal, I don't know where they got him, but in a lot of the shots, to me, he just looks kind of lost and confused, and like he's not sure what he's supposed to be doing. But maybe that's just me.
Well, I'll take a fresh look this weekend at that film. That's one of the ones I'm most interested in seeing, just because it's been so long, and at best I've seen it once. But the original Dracula is interesting. It's a classic. It's iconic. I don't love it, unfortunately, because of just how stiff it is overall. I always say this when we talk about this show, is that we played that and Frankenstein 31 back to back at one of our early, maybe even the first Universal Monster Mash, and it was shocking to see the difference in the film aesthetic between those two films. The acting style, the editing, the camera work, everything. You would have sworn that Frankenstein was made a decade after Dracula because it just felt so much more alive, as it were. Dracula often does feel like a filmed stage play, and the performances feel like a stage performance of the day, and the way the dialogue is delivered. It was totally worth watching. Maybe it's just me, but it is one that over the years I've fell less in love with as time goes by.
I think the Spanish version has a longer running time, and it's noted that in the Bela Lugosi version, everybody knows the story of Dracula. So the first victim, Lucy, becomes a vampire, and they have to go stake her. And then before going into that home stretch of the movie where they're after Dracula himself, well, in the Lugosi version, you never see what happens to her. They never take care of her, and so the Spanish version does, and just things like that, basic things. Even it's still talky, it's the same script basically, but they just it's just more dynamic and more fluid.
The Spanish version of Dracula is actually about a half hour longer. And it's one of those, it's 105 minutes. And it's one of those things where every time I look at a movie of this era, I always think they're going to be really short. Maybe because I'm thinking about genre films that were intended to be paired up and they were very short. But yeah, 100. So it's approaching 2 hours, which is shocking for compared to everything else we're playing this weekend, but a nice way to send it off. And tickets for that are available at the gate and online at mahoningdit.com. If anybody's listening to this before the show, and if you're listening to this anytime after, let's say, October 25th, 2025, we'll be doing it again next October. So, Monster Kid memories. You were mentioning to me before we chatted that you had Aurora model kits, which is something I only ever read about. I was never a model kit kid. At some point, I got into snap models because I think I was just lazy and didn't want to deal with glue. And you could do them in like 2.5 minutes, snap them together, put on the stickers. Look, it's a space shuttle. What was which ones did you have? Did you have any of the ones that were like controversial and gruesome?
I don't think so. I was kind of a tail end boomer, so it's funny. The original models were in these oblong boxes, and those did have the James Bama painted covers. And I was lucky enough that I think I saved at least the Dracula, and it's somewhere in the storage unit. But I definitely attempted to build and paint the models. They're thus destroying a lot of their value today. But then, like when I was an older kid, it kind of didn't, moved on to, I guess, older kid things. They put out the same models, but in kind of a square box with glow in the dark pieces that you could substitute if you wanted to have a glow in the dark piece instead of a regular painted piece. So that's kind of my era of monster kiddom. I kind of caught the end of one and the beginning of the other, maybe.
So would that mean like the Wolfman would have like a glow in the dark arm or something like that?
Yeah, you could take like his hands and his face and substitute the glow in the dark pieces instead.
My dalliance with Universal Monster toys was, I remember, and again, this would have been the very early 80s, they put out a line of action figures of the basic Universal monsters. And I think I remember buying one for a friend for his birthday party. And it was a Frankenstein's monster. And the box was like a huge picture of Frankenstein's monster's face, Karloff. And I think they glowed in the dark or something like that. And that was around that same time as those You'll Die Laughing bubblegum cards. So I don't know if it was some kind of a coordinated push for Universal Monster marketing again around, 79 to 81, probably in there or something. But other than that, it was trying to find that kind of stuff at flea markets as a kid, which at the time the stuff was maybe 20 years old. So you could still find it, and everything wasn't put on a shelf with a high price tag at that point. Like you could still find cool stuff like that. But
that was a random thought that I'd meant to bring up kind of when we were talking about Mazeppa and those late night syndications. I mean, I don't know if you've ever done this comparison or this kind of discussion where I don't know if it makes it just seem surreal or makes sense. But if those movies, the House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula, were like 25 years old by the time I saw them on TV. So that's like thinking like now, like Silence of the Lambs or something.
I do that
I don't know
all
if
the
that makes it.
time.
Yeah.
I think about
Yeah.
the movies that I saw on TV as a kid that were in quotes old movies, and some of them were just a few years old. And now, if I saw a movie that age on TV, I'd be like, oh, yeah, that thing from a couple years ago. But for me, I was just revering these movies that were really not beloved by anybody. Like the Amicus movies that I was getting into, seeing Asylum on TV as a kid in the 80s, and that movie was maybe 10 years old at the time. It was it's funny to think about how time passes, and you think about what, like, to us now, the 80s being like 40 years ago. Well, for me as a kid in the 80s, the 1940s was 40 years ago. And to me, that's an entire different universe back then, as opposed to like the 80s to now. It doesn't seem like it's that different. Maybe it's just that the world kind of went from black and white to color between the 40s and the 80s. And from the 80s to now, it just, we got more gadgets.
Yeah, and you can figure like these universal horrors made during World War II, and these guys were overseas, and they brought the prints to the military bases and ran them, and that may be the way some of these guys saw them, and then they came home, started families, had kids, and maybe something you could watch on the Late Show with your kid who was seeing it for the first time.
That's such a, we talk about the Monster Kid era, and we'll be talking about the classic drive-in era and the era of driving kings and all that. And part of the just was the excitement of staying up late and watching movies on TV before you had a VCR, when you had to like plan, and maybe you'd miss it, maybe you'd fall asleep before it was over, but it was like this little exciting expedition you'd go on as a kid. I remember setting an alarm. Talking about a later period, but setting an alarm because I didn't have a VCR, because the USA Network was going to be showing the Brainiac, or no, Curse of the Doll People. It was Curse of the Doll People. They had the package before anybody else was really doing this. USA had all the Mexican horror movies from the 60s, 50s and 60s, and they would play them on Commander USA, but they would also play them in the middle of the night. So I set my alarm to wake up at like 2 or 3 in the morning so that I could watch this movie, because otherwise I might never see it. And it was a exciting time to be alive. And maybe it's more exciting now for people to just be like, Curse of the Doll People, type. There it is. Now I'm watching it. But the effort and the con jobs with parents, and the little expeditions you'd have to go on to make things happen, it made them so much more rewarding at the time.
It's hard to explain to. It's not like walking 5 miles to school in the snow, but it's our version of that, huh?
We had to buy a TV guide. We had to read a TV guide. We had to have a pen to circle things. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Remember the TV guide would call a lot of those Universal monsters. It would label them as melodrama instead of
Oh,
horror. Yeah.
I just always liked that when the Leonard Nimoy show In Search of, they would list it as speculation. And I still love that idea. A lot of the History Channel now is speculation. Uh, it went from the World War II channel to the UFO channel. So
Yeah.
we brought you here not only to talk about Universal monsters, which has been, believe me, a joy, and I would be thrilled to do this for another few hours, but also Drive-In Kings. Now, I don't want to get this wrong. Drive-In Kings of 1977 or Drive-In Kings of 77?
1977. I spell it out. I'm real formal that way.
I thought so too, because if you don't, 1877, 1777. So this is an ongoing comic book that you have been doing. You have been doing it as a Kickstarter, which a lot of indie comics do now. And if you could explain to people what Drive-In Kings is and how they can get it, and then I'd like to dig it into the upcoming issue without getting into any spoilers, just in terms of each issue. And I'll let you say this in full, but each issue kind of draws on themes from drive-in movie genres of the 60s, 70s, and specific films and actors and stuff. And I'd love to just talk about some of your inspirations for the new issue without giving it away.
Well, sure. Yeah. The basic premise, if just to catch up, is it's kind of from one to the other. It's from back in 1977, the drive-ins were starting to close and were kind of on their last legs a bit, and they were running more like the grindhouse programming or the unique kind of films associated with the drive-in. So the drive-in was both a physical place where my three teen pranksters can go and drink beer undisturbed by the police or anything like that, and then they get pulled into the drive-in as this realm of flicks, and they literally get pulled into this realm. And so then we have some fun kind of riffing on the genres. We have the City of Lost Women, we have motorcycle zombies, we have issue 4 kind of pays tribute to the backroads car chase flicks like Eat My Dust and Gone in 60 Seconds and things like that. The 5th issue then continues a two-parter, and it kind of imagines the Texas Chainsaw Gothic farmhouse and the family you meet there. If our instead of the kind of the hapless van of unprepared teens, what if you had our 3 teen pranksters face off with the redneck family? And then the 6th issue sort of gets to what I call a season finale, and it'll kind of be a pause point that sort of wraps things up, but in a fairly unsatisfying way that introduces some new complications. So I can hopefully keep this thing going down the road. But it's definitely at least sort of a cap point. And if the 5th issue was mostly a riff on Chainsaw Massacre, the 6th one is mostly a riff on the green slime and the retro futuristic 60s sci-fi movies.
The Gamma, is it Gamma 1 they're called?
Yeah, it's Citadel Alpha in my world here.
Those are so fun. These Euro-Italian space films that all have a similar vibe to them. The Green Slime it's one of the great trailers, and it's one of the great theme songs for a film of that era. It's been covered by a few people, and it's this weird sort of mashup of like, it was a Japanese-Italian co-production, if I recall.
Yeah, and the thing that's fascinating about it is that I would have to assume the actors, when they signed on, they thought the special effects were going to be good, or even as they filmed parts of it, they didn't realize how ridiculous the monsters were going to look, as they're amazingly straight-faced, and it's a weird tonal clash between these guys that are making kind of this stock for the era, the kind of what kind of man reads Playboy kind of dudes facing off against these rubber suited monsters.
Richard Jekyll, Richard Basehart, and Luciana Paluzzi from Thunderball. a wonderful cast. It's nicely shot for what it is, but it is a hoot. It is a movie we would love to play at the drive-in, but we don't know of a print of it anywhere.
Oh,
And
wow.
we try to
Wow.
stay, with 35, but it's one of my. I always forget. We do these Patreon only episodes of the show, and it's mostly just we just ask for questions from the members and we dig into things. And often we get asked, what's your holy grail? What's the movie you really wish you could show? And I never think of it, but The Green Slime really is one of those because it would look amazing on that screen, and it's just bonkers and it's
It's
ridiculous.
just pure drive-in. Yeah,
It
it
is.
really is.
So that is one of your influences. Is there anything else? And one of the things I love about Drive-In Kings is that if you're a fan of this stuff, there's all these little details in there, these little nods, these little references. What might be playing on a radio, what a character might look like. Is there anything you can tip your hand without giving? I really don't want you to give anything away because I want people to buy it and enjoy it. As
Well,
they
no, I've
view it.
given this away in an update already. I've shown the photos, and I thought calling our chief science officer, Dr. Luciana, would
Yes,
be kind of too spot on. So I call her Dr. Raquel Vetri,
excellent.
because I pull from Raquel Welch in, Fantastic Voyage and
Mhm.
Fathom and that kind of thing. And then just Vetri sounded fun because Victoria Vetri, who was Hammer's other bikini-clad dinosaur starlet, and that wasn't her real name anyway, so I didn't feel like I was stealing it.
She was when dinosaurs ruled the earth. She was a Playboy playmate, and I believe she was also in Invasion of the Bee Girls. Speaking of drive-in classics.
Yeah, so you got to at least steal half of her not real name.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you say that this is it 12 issue is your plan, or is it keep going until nobody will let you write it anymore?
And kind of yes to both those things. When I sat down and wrote these scripts during the pandemic, I wrote 12, and I didn't, I knew I was wading in uncharted waters and the deep forest to Kickstarter, but now that all those realities have kicked in, I did always intend it to kind of be two 6-issue volumes or arcs that could be collected, as trade paperbacks. But the second half of it, I'm going to just try to see if I can get wider distribution or a third party partner or something for the first half before we go into the second half. And the second half may not be 6. I mean, there is an explanation for this drive-in world. It may not be a good one, but
But
I'd
it's
like
the
to
one you
get to
have.
it and kind of owe the fans I have so far the kind of explanation or payoff for how all this came to be. But it may not be another 6. It may be like another 4 or something like that.
Can you explain to the listeners who may not be aware, how does getting issue 6, or how does getting any of the issues work right now? If somebody wanted issue, like if they hadn't bought any and they wanted to, what you're doing is it's Kickstarter. So you're helping fund the creation of issue 6. Is there a way to get the previous issues individually?
Yeah, you can get them as add-ons. So I don't know, Kickstarter is kind of its own thing, and I know you have to create a password and sign up a credit card and all that. But if you do all that, the campaign for issue 6 is live until November 5th or 6th, I think. And then you can go and you can pledge for the one in creation, the 6th, and then you can catch up on the rest with add-ons. Go back and add the back issues. And there is a collected trade paperback of the first 3. So that can be one of the add-ons.
And one of the cool things you do too, which I think may be common with independent Kickstarter type comic publications, is different covers to choose from, which I've really loved the different covers that you've come up with for these various issues. Do you have multiples for issue 6 as well?
Yeah, I didn't do 4 this time, but I did 3. And one of them, in kind of keeping with the little mini tradition, is a parody of a Crown International movie poster with the sillier art and the silly blurbs. So
I was talking to somebody about Crown International the other day. For me, Crown International, they were less than American International. They still had fun movies, but more often than not, the ad campaign was better than the film was. Sometimes the ad campaigns, I would look at a trailer and go, "You're not really selling this," but they were such a staple of the drive-in era. Do you have any favorite Crown International films?
Oh, I don't know if I call them favorites, but they're,
Memorable.
kind of their R-rated nudie stuff, and the things like the van were what were playing when I was in high school. Those were the ones at the drive-in, and so I guess I have an extra little fondness for those. I think we've talked in the previous ones that another thing, the walking to school in the snow, another thing kids today don't understand is the lengths we go to see nudity on film.
Yes. We've talked to other people about their drive-in memories who have been on the show, and so many people have talked about drive-ins that you could see from the road when you were driving by, and asking Dad to slow down a little when he was passing a certain section of the highway so that maybe you'd catch a glimpse on that drive-in screen when you drove by.
I think that's actually my first glimpse of the green slime was that, because driving on the highway to the town where my parents lived, sometimes we'd come home after dark, and it would be, I know exactly when to raise up from that back seat and stick my head out the window.
That's like your sub series is issue 6A, The Quest for Nudity.
Yeah. Well, there would be a riff on those kind of women in prison and nurse pictures in the second half of the series. I'll put it that way. So
Beautiful.
yeah, if we get there, if we ever see that. Yeah, that whole thing of like the drive-in movie, like the old definition of porn, I can't explain it, but I know it when I see it, and
Right.
that's what I was going for in the comic. The comic's a different realm, and you have to adjust and adapt, but that's what I was going for, and that's what I was saying about your first pair of Universal movies. Those are the drive-in Frankenstein movies.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the thing I like about Driving Kings too, is it really nails the vibe of hanging out with friends in that era, or really kind of in any era. Just friends who are looking for a good time, who may not fit in socially, but you've got each other and you got this thing you like to do. I'm a big fan of the more modern, in the scheme of things, throwback to the 70s movie Detroit Rock City. That vibe of those guys who they're huge fans of Kiss, and they just want to, get a little loaded, go see Kiss, meet a girl, blah, blah, blah. And Driving Kings really nails that as far as just the human element that's at the core of this wild ride through 70s disreputable cinema. And I can't stress enough that if you like what we do at the Mahoning, or what we've been talking about tonight, you really want to get these issues. And I'm saying this partially selfishly because I really want to see this series get through to the end. So I want to see all 12 issues come out. So we'll put in the show notes, as they say, and everywhere we post this, we'll put to the campaign so that people can just please directly go there.
I appreciate that. I appreciate your enthusiasm. Yeah, the only thing I was going to say about the three friends is that as you write it and you realize how much you have to pack into the pages, you don't get as much in there as you want. But I did deliberately, there's a little bit of me and my buddies in there, but I just didn't want like one to be the nerd, one to be the fat kid. I wanted them just to be, three guys with a prankster sense of humor.
It totally nails it. It does.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us, Mike. And really, anytime you want to come back on to talk about anything, these are like the easiest shows to do in terms of just us chatting. This is like what we would do if the mic wasn't here anyway. The microphones, I should say, not if you weren't here. I'm talking to myself. If the microphones weren't here, this is a kind of conversation we would have. Oh, but just you're in Vegas and I'm in New York, so it's kind of hard to do that in person. So hopefully one day our paths will cross on some drive-in lot somewhere, and lightning will strike and we'll be released from the prison and create a creature. So what is there an easy URL for people to go to find your writing? I presume Cult Vegas is available on Amazon. Driving Kings, is there like a short verbal URL for that?
Not really. I could, if you post it when you post this, but you really almost have to go on Kickstarter and just type in Drive-In Kings on their search is really the better way to do it.
As you leave the theater, folks, please be careful. Don't let this happen to your car. Be sure to remove the speaker before you leave. If you should accidentally pull a speaker loose, please turn it in at our snack bar or box office. Thank you.
Well, that is all from us. Hopefully we'll be seeing some of you folks at Universal Monster Mash 9, or if you listen to this 6 months from now, mark your dates for Universal Monster Mash 10. It's always the last full weekend of our calendar year in October. Until next time, I'm Mark, General Manager at the Mahoning Drive-In Theater, and as Virgil would say, Jeff, take it away, my friend.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for coming out tonight to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. We hope you'll come back and see us again real soon. The exit is on the right-hand side of the screen at the front of the field, and most importantly, have a very safe trip home. Good night and God bless you.